Year 8, greetings to another lesson of Gothic horror with Mr. Thomas standing in for Miss Street. Now, we began to look at Edgar Allan Poe, this extraordinary writer, last week. We read the first couple of paragraphs of his story, his Gothic story, A Telltale Heart. Today, we're going to read another page of The Telltale Heart and do a lesson, and then you will have a chance to discuss this lesson or anything you're having difficulty with in the new clinic, English Learning Clinic, which takes place on Tuesday at 9:30 in the morning. You would have been sent an invitation, so you'll have to just go into your calendar, click join, and a teacher will be there going through this lesson and helping you manage it at your own pace. So do drop in on Tuesday. Let's look at righteous then. Do you remember what righteous means? Beauteous means full of beauty. Bounteous means full of bounty. So righteous means, yes, full of good intentions. You remember Elizabeth Proctor from The Crucible, John Proctor's wife? In what way was she righteous? Think about it. She was loyal to her husband, tried to help him win his court case, didn't gossip about him. She kept her home in good order as an example of Puritans, weren't they? Puritan womanly discipline, if you like. What's a sociopath then? Remember from last lesson, a sociopath is someone who exhibits antisocial thoughts or antisocial behavior. And what early clues are there in The Telltale Heart? That the narrator, not the author, it's important to separate the narrator from the author. And the narrator is the person telling the story. The narrator is a sociopath. What did he want to do? What did he boast about doing to the man early on in the paragraph, the second paragraph? Well, he says that he killed this gentleman because of his unseemly looking eye, or this unpleasant looking eye defect he has. You'll need to know what neurosis is. A neurosis is a mild personality disorder characterized by obsessive stressed behavior. So if you are focused on one thing and get becoming upset about it, you don't let it go, you have a neurosis. It's demonstrating neurotic behavior. Neuro plus osis, meaning abnormal mind. So, what was the white rabbit stressed about? What was the white rabbit's neurosis? Remember, in Alice in Wonderland, he was always he was obsessed with something to do with his watch, should we say? And is someone a sociopath if they are aware of their own neuroses? Our narrator says that he is not mad, but if someone is aware of their own neuroses, their own obsessions, can they be a sociopath, do you think? It's a question for you to examine your own opinion. Today we're going to revise who Edgar Allan Poe was, look at some of his methods of working, which I believe will really inspire your own creative writing. He had a very unusual way of building stories, identify references to the narrator's neurosis, annotate the text. So we're going to find some and highlight some examples that you might want to use in a bit of writing you're going to do on insanity. And as we go along, we're going to see if we can remember any of the other Gothic stories and make links. Notice, we won't have time for a video, I'm afraid. So, Edgar Allan Poe, who's this? He was 2 across. Do you remember what his parents were? Actors. By the way, this is practice for my clinic, so I've been trying to practice writing with a mouse. I'm afraid it isn't terribly legible But it's at least I've had some practice for tomorrow or Tuesday. His parents were actors. Poe, 6 died in Baltimore. He worked in the US for most of his life, went to the university. 9 he attended the University of Virginia, having been to school actually in England. His wife, 7 Virginia, died of, that's right, University of Virginia, married Virginia. His wife died of tuberculosis. And number 10 across, Tamerlane is the gap here. It's Tamerlane and Other Poems, first published in 1827. He was the central figure of the American Renaissance, which is 11 across. And crucially, he's considered the inventor of detective fiction. That is an extraordinary title, isn't it? The inventor of the detective story. Murders of the Rue Morgue is the whodunit, or what done it. I mentioned he married his Virginia, who was his cousin. Number 4 down, Stonehouse. His family home was the Allan household that was in Richmond. He was born in Boston, and his most famous poem is entitled The Raven. Now, I've found some notes from Edgar Allan Poe about how he composed The Raven. It's a very unusual, different way of working. So let's write some notes on how Edgar Allan Poe writes. I have 5 bullet points that are, I'm afraid, going to appear in the same order. He says, first choose the length. A story should be able to be read, or a poem, in one sitting. So he wasn't interested in writing very lengthy things. Then choose the effect you want to have on your audience before you think about any plot. In fact, don't think about the plot at all. Just make the incidents create an overall effect on your reader, and then the story will write itself. Choose the tone, basically the atmosphere. Interestingly, he then says, decide on a unique structural device next. We're going to look at his use of exclamation marks. We're going to touch on his use of hyphens, which I mentioned last lesson. He uses repetition as well. In The Raven, there's repetition of a particular word. And then how does he decide on the word? Then you decide what character the structural device will have. So, what feel do you want to create with this repetition, or with the exclamation marks, and then decide why the structural device is needed. I'll go into more detail here. So the length should be short enough to read in one go. The effect, well, the effect on the reader is, perhaps you want the reader to feel uneasy. Look at how the exclamation marks work. Oh, so gently in the center. What foresight, what dissimulation, which means intelligence and deceptiveness, what cunning, what caution, what foresight, what dissimulation. So repetition there, exclamation marks there. I moved last line, very, very slowly, so he wants to be impressed. But what effect would he have? What effect does that have on you? Well, do you want to feel appalled? Do you want to feel repulsed by this individual who's so proud of his own criminality? Then choose the tone. Well, the tone is going to be insanity, really. He's describing with excitement how he's done something awful. I decided on a unique structural device. So how do I want to convey this madness? Poe said to himself, I am going to use hyphens, I'm going to use repetition, I'm going to use exclamation marks. The several hyphens here convey this sense of hyperactive, boastful excitement. It's hesitant. He's almost overflowing with ideas and splits in his chain of thought. Then decide what character the structural device will have. He's decided to use, yes, exclamation marks. There is a boastful one. Ha ha, the tub caught all the blood. So gently I did it. You should have seen me. How very slowly. But why? Because. Why the structural device is needed? Because he wants to boast later on to the police. He wants to be presented as an overconfident man. So confident that he, second line, places his own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim when he's being interviewed by the police later on. So that excitement is going to lead him into troubles. That's why the structural device is needed. So identify examples of the writer's neurosis. So could you write a subheading, please? I'll give you about 5 seconds while I shut my door. I'm assuming that many of you don't have access to a printer. So as I go through the text, we're going to jump over to Word shortly, I suggest if you do not have a printer that you copy the words I've highlighted in bold and make the comments I make, or your own. If you do have a printer and you have the text in front of you, good for you. Highlight the text I have, or some additional ones during our conversation, and make some comments as we go along. Then we're going to use that and write an answer to this question. We're going to write a summary of how the writer presents neurosis, and that's going to be your task for today, for this week actually. You'll only have one lesson a week. So yeah, so let's identify examples of the writer's neurosis, shall we? I'm jumping out of PowerPoint, making sure I press the right buttons in the right order, share screen, share Word, arrive at Word. So let's go, we'll read a page of this because the lessons have to be half an hour or less. Here's shrieks of excitement. So we'll go from line 11. In line 10 and before, we learn that the man narrating this says that he wants to kill someone with a dodgy eye. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing. This character says he isn't mad because he's clever, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, what foresight. This repetition shows how boastful he was, and the repetition emphasizes moments of, let's say criminal cunning, shall we, or criminal... What foresight? He's a calculating murderer. Again, what dissimulation, what foresight, what caution. He's really pleased with himself, isn't he? Let me read the paragraph and then come back to the notes. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night about midnight I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then, when I made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, that no light shone out. In case you're confused about this, a dark lantern is a lantern, a torch that's covered up. So you have to open dark panels in order for the light to diffuse out. This reminds me of the scene in Dorian Gray where Dorian leads Basil up to the attic with a candle. It's a lantern actually, and they place that on the floor. Dorian lights a half extinguished candle in the room. No, I thrust in my head to the man's bedroom. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it so slowly, very, very slowly, so I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening, so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Ah! Would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously. And the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye. Unpleasant physicality, or physiognomy, perhaps, is, for me, reminiscent of someone who is repulsive to look at. Do you remember who, in his diaries, mentioned that on first sight his blood ran cold? On first sight of his host, his blood ran cold. Who was that host? The man with the long nose, pale face, not a trace of colour about him anywhere, Dracula. And this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight, but I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. This lunatic, for want of a better expression, wants to remove the evil eye from the man. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night just at 12 I looked in upon him while he slept. Let's review this paragraph. Oh so gently, the exclamation marks is the structural device I believe Poe chose to create this sense of boastful satisfaction in his calculation. Premeditated murder. I think I said that. How cunningly again, how cunning, how slow. Again, he's reinforcing his own intelligence. He's reinforcing his, let's call it an inflated his own intelligence. I'm cunning. I moved so cleverly, slowly. I was so cautious. Again, repetition emphasizes, what does that say? Emphasizes a moment's criminal cunning. His criminal cunning. I'm sorry. I'm going to use the same quotation. Everywhere I see repetition, I urge you to do the same. In fact, repetition emphasizes his criminal cunning, how cautious he moved, how cunning he moved, how much foresight he had. Upon the 8th night, I was more than unusually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night, so he's saying time ran slowly. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. My own powers, my sagacity, that repetition. Let's highlight it. The personal pronoun gives him the sense, conveys how big his ego is, really. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph to think that there I was opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea. Perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch, with a thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through fear of robbers. This sense of incarceration and imprisonment is features in Dracula as well. Every door is bolted, and it's a Gothic theme in general. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. I had my head in, and I was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed, listening, just as I have done night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Let's review this paragraph. So here he's come again to remove the I, but he's made a blunder. He's woken the old man up by accident, and they're both frozen in the darkness. My powers, my sagacity, let's say, the repetition. Ego. An ego means self, basically, love of his self. Repetition of the puzzle pronoun reflects. Big ego, so there's no big ego. Big ego. Yeah. I fairly chuckle at the idea. This is rather insane. His neurosis is his own intelligence. He's obsessed with his own brilliance. And, or we could say apparent brilliance at this stage. And he's also, this is slightly insane. I mean, this is perhaps, he's taking pleasure of the idea of murder. I'm sure that's slightly pathological. Obsessed with his own brilliance and amused by the thought of killing. There are a couple of other references to him laughing at his own criminality. The room was as black as pitch. This is a Gothic idea. And I was about to open the lantern. I've highlighted that because it reminded me of Dorian Gray. Franklin as well, actually, when he's shown into the octagonal room that doesn't have any windows. Presently I heard a slight groan, and I knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or relief or of grief. Oh no! It was the low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it had welled up from my own bosom, deepening with its dreadful echo the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt, and pitied him, though I chuckled at heart. He takes pleasure in other people's fear and panic. Causing discomfort. If we're looking for examples of insanity or neurosis, this man is obsessed with his own brilliance. Insanity, he's taking pleasure in causing discomfort. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise when owned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He'd been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He'd been saying to himself, "It's nothing but the wind in the chimney. It's only a mouse crossing the floor, or it's merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he'd been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he'd found all in vain, because death, in approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him and enveloped the victim. I think it's worth making a note of this gloriously Gothic phrase. Think about character. Can't type and talk at the same time. I know what Miss Chillingworth is talking about now. Think of the character who climbs out of the window in a black cape and crawls down a wall. Looking like a black shadow. Who was that? Dracula. Gothic phrase evoking Dracula. Dracula's appearance, really. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he never saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, again, repetition. Emphasizing with his own planning. So last week we spoke about how Edgar Allan Poe, you should expect a lot of problem solving in an Edgar Allan Poe story. This, by showing how the criminal's mind is working and how he's reacting to his surroundings, he's showing that the narrator is a complex person. Plot is desire meets obstacle, and to what extent the obstacle is overcome. In this case, the character meets an obstacle, but will he overcome? A simple dim ray, like the thread of a spider, shot out the crevice and fell upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness. So this eye has been illuminated by the accident, the light by accident, or a dull blue with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I directed the rays by instinct precisely on the damned spot. Have I not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the sense? Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too, so there's a ticking sound. The beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury as the beating of a drum stimulates a soldier into courage. Okay, so he's explaining that he's about to murder someone, yet he's justified. He calls it, he has the righteous, it's the righteous killing of a soldier, not a murder. Not murder, but righteous killing. He dares call himself a hero at this stage. Not murder, but righteous killing. Execution rather than an impulsive murder. So the neurosis, one of his obsessions as well, is the eye. So it would be right to mention and let's have the caesura there as well, which almost shows it as an unpleasant memory that's just interrupted his thoughts. Remember, I mentioned that his thought patterns are suddenly diverted, suddenly switched from one to another. Caesura introduces sudden memory of the eye. Okay, we'll talk about the murder next. So they're both there breathing in the darkness. What on earth is that? Sorry, there's a row outside. Okay, I'm going to jump over to Word, and in a couple of minutes, it might take you over half hour to tell you how to write a summary. So let me go back into the. You need to write the subheading, please. A summary of how the writer presents the narrator's neurosis. I'll give you 15 seconds to write that. A summary of how the writer presents the narrator's neurosis. If you don't know what a summary is a statement plus a reference plus an inference. That's it. That's your summary. So a statement is the narrator is obsessed with the eye. The reference is he calls it a dull blue. The inference is that he can't escape the memory. This suggests he can't escape the memory of the eye. He's focused. He's been fixated on it. So with inference, you want words like this suggests, this implies, this infers. So let's take this idea that he placed his own seat just above the grave where the man's buried under the floorboards. So my statement is, Poe presents the narrator as obsessed by his own intelligence. What's my reference? Well, it's up there in the quotation. Can you choose what my reference is going to be? Showing that he's obsessed by his own intelligence. So we want words like victory, triumph, perfect, wild audacity, which means boldness. The narrator says the narrator sits on the very spot where he buried his victim. See, I only want one or two words in my quotation. So the narrator sits on the very spot where he buried his victim when the police interview him. And this suggests, or this infers, this suggests he takes satisfaction from deceiving the police. So his neurosis, or his obsession, is with appearing intelligent and sane. Poe presents his narrators as anxious about, or obsessed with, or stressed about, for example, and there you should place one of the quotations that you made, that you have here under the identification, or that you've highlighted on your sheets. Yeah, so this suggests that he, what? And your reward for all that work is a few images of Edgar Allan Poe. And final question. List 3 examples of the narrator's neuroses. Thank you. Any queries, you can come and talk to us about them on Tuesday at 9:30. Otherwise, we'll see you next week at this time.